You won't believe what happened when an HOA Karen took things way too far. Picture this. My disabled daughter, trapped in a boat, set ablaze by a woman who thought she could get away with anything. She didn't know who I was. She didn't. No, I was the fire marshal. The chaos, the danger, and the rage that flooded through me in that moment. It's something you have to see to believe. This story is about how one woman's ignorance nearly led to a tragedy, and how she had no idea who she was messing with until it was too late. Stick around because this intense, shocking story will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. Everything had been perfectly normal that day. It was the kind of day that I had come to cherish. Quiet, predictable, and full of routine. I had spent my morning in a peaceful rhythm, enjoying the simple things in life, like sipping my coffee while watching my daughter play outside. My daughter, born with a disability, required extra care and attention. But I had worked hard to give her a life as full and enjoyable as possible, despite the challenges she faced. I made sure she felt loved and safe, even when the world around us seemed overwhelming. Today, everything felt calm and easy, a reflection of the life I had worked so hard to build. We had spent the morning together by the lake. It was a bright, sunny day, the kind that made you appreciate the small moments. My daughter, who adored the water, was happily playing in her small boat, tethered securely to the dock. I stood nearby, keeping a close eye on her as I always did. Watching her, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a moment of peace in the midst of our busy, sometimes chaotic lives. This was our routine, me making sure she was safe and her exploring the world in her own way. It was nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary, just a perfect, ordinary day. Little did I know that everything was about to change. Suddenly, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached my ears. I turned to see a car slowly pulling up along the dock. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor or someone passing by. But then, I saw the driver, and my heart sank. It was the HOA Karen, a woman who had been making my life miserable for weeks. She had been relentlessly harassing me with petty complaints about my property, complaints about the condition of my lawn, the trees on my land, and the way I used the lakeside. She had been a constant presence, sending letter after letter, making unreasonable demands, and always trying to dictate how I should live my life. At first, I had ignored her, assuming she was just another disgruntled neighbor who would eventually move on to something else. But I was wrong. The woman got out of her car and walked toward me with an odd look on her face, one that instantly made my stomach twist with unease. There was something about her expression, something almost smug, like she knew she had the upper hand. "I think it's time for your daughter to learn some boundaries," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. It felt like a slap in the face, like a personal attack, and I immediately felt my defenses go up. What did she mean by that? What was she trying to say? Her words didn't make sense at first, but as she started walking toward the boat, my heart began to race. She was getting closer to my daughter, who was blissfully unaware of what was happening. The woman was headed straight for her, with a malicious gleam in her eyes. I watched in horror as she reached the boat and began undoing the ropes that were keeping it securely tied to the dock. Panic gripped me as I realized what was happening. She was going to take my daughter out of the boat, push her into the water, or worse, do something far more dangerous. I immediately shouted at her to stop, to leave my daughter alone. But the woman didn't even flinch. She continued with her actions, now fully detached from any sense of decency or concern. "That boat is a hazard," she said casually, as though she were talking about something trivial, like a broken chair or a cracked window. "It's time to get rid of it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just about a boat. It was about her crossing a line. My daughter was disabled, and the boat was a part of her world, something that brought her joy and freedom. The woman was targeting my child, and I wasn't about to let that happen. The rage that filled me was instant and fierce. This wasn't just a petty complaint about property anymore. It was personal. She was trying to take something from my daughter, something precious and irreplaceable, and I wasn't going to let it happen. Without thinking, I sprang into action. I ran toward the boat, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman had no right to do what she was doing, and I wasn't going to stand by and let her harm my daughter. I shouted at her again, but my voice barely registered with her. She had become fixated on her mission, oblivious to the consequences of her actions. As she reached the boat, her face twisted with satisfaction, as if she had already won. It was then that I realized just how far she was willing to go, just how far her vendetta against me had driven her. This wasn't a simple complaint. This was an act of cruelty, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't just let her have her way and walk away unscathed. I had to act. This woman had no idea who she was messing with. I wasn't just some helpless homeowner, intimidated by her petty complaints and threats. I was a mother, someone who would fight to protect my child, no matter the cost. But there was something else she didn't know. I was also a trained professional. I was the fire marshal, and I wasn't about to let anyone harm my daughter, not on my watch. The time for talking was over. It was time to take control and show her just how wrong she was to underestimate me. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, I wasn't backing down. The storm was about to hit. Before I could react, the woman had already reached the boat, her actions quick and deliberate. She was speaking to my daughter in a sickly sweet voice, trying to coax her into the boat. I could see my daughter's confused expression. She was young and trusting, unsure of the danger she was in. My instincts screamed at me to run to her, to stop whatever was happening, but I couldn't move fast enough. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched the woman casually untie the ropes that kept the boat tethered to the dock. I had no idea what she was planning, but something in the pit of my stomach told me this wasn't just a simple disagreement or a misunderstanding. This was going far beyond anything I had ever imagined. In what felt like an eternity, but was only a matter of seconds, the boat was suddenly free from the dock, drifting out into the open water with my daughter inside. I shouted at her, demanding that she stop, that she get away from the boat, but the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me a cold, malicious smile that sent an immediate shiver down my spine. It was as though she enjoyed seeing my fear, seeing my desperation. "It's time for her to learn," she sneered, the words dripping with disdain, as if my daughter's life was nothing more than a lesson in control. In that moment, I could see the madness in her eyes, something dark and twisted that I hadn't recognized before. This wasn't just a woman upset about my property anymore. This was something far worse. She was willing to harm my daughter just to prove a point. Before I could move, before I could even think of what to do, the woman pulled something from her pocket, a lighter. I froze. My mind screamed at me, warning me of the danger, but it was too late. She flicked the lighter open, her hand steady, and in one swift motion she set the boat on fire. The flames erupted with terrifying speed, a sudden burst of orange and red lighting up the small boat in the middle of the water. The heat from the fire was so intense that I could feel it even from the shore. My blood ran cold, a mixture of shock and terror flooding my body as I realized what she had done. My daughter, helpless and unable to comprehend the danger, was trapped in the middle of the burning boat. The fire quickly spread, engulfing the wooden structure in flames that seemed to reach for the sky. In that split second, everything in my world stopped. I could hear nothing but the crackling of the fire and the desperate beating of my heart. My daughter's screams, her confusion, her fear, were drowned out by the roar of the flames. She had no idea what was happening, no idea why the boat was on fire or what she was supposed to do, and I was powerless to help her. Time seemed to slow down as I watched in disbelief. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the horrifying scene unfolding before me. The woman, who had once been a nuisance, now felt like a monster. She had no idea of the devastation she was causing. My mind raced, every scenario of how to save my daughter flashing before my eyes. I couldn't just stand there and watch, but the heat from the fire was growing unbearable, and I knew that if I didn't act fast, I would lose her. The very thought of losing her, of watching her suffer because of this insane woman, was more than I could bear. In that moment, every fiber of my being screamed for action. I couldn't break down. I couldn't lose control. I had to do something. I had to act. I had to save my daughter. And then it hit me. The woman had no idea who she was dealing with. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have realized, was that I was the fire marshal. In an instant, my training kicked in. Every protocol, every action I had learned over the years rushed back to me. I wasn't just a parent in that moment. I was a trained professional, and I knew exactly what to do. I couldn't waste time. I had to save my daughter, and I wasn't going to let this woman's madness stand in the way of that. I ran toward the dock without hesitation, my eyes locked on the burning boat and my daughter inside it. The fire was spreading fast, but I knew I had to act quickly. I shouted at the woman to stop, to leave the boat alone, but she stood there, her face twisted in glee, as if she were watching some kind of sick spectacle. But I wasn't just going to let her get away with it. I had the skills, the knowledge, and the tools to put an end to this. And in that moment, I knew I had the power to save my daughter. I ran to my truck, grabbing the fire extinguisher and the other equipment I needed. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins, propelling me forward with a sense of urgency I had never felt before. The boat was still burning fiercely, but I was ready. I wasn't going to let this woman destroy everything I held dear. The fight had just begun, and I was going to win it. As I reached the shore, I took aim at the fire, knowing exactly how to target it. The fire extinguisher roared to life, spraying foam across the flames, slowing the spread, and finally, with the help of a few other nearby fire units I had called in, the flames began to die down. It wasn't just the fire I was putting out. It was the terror I had felt, the helplessness that had nearly consumed me. As I reached the boat and pulled my daughter into my arms, the world seemed to right itself again. She was safe. She was alive. And the woman who had done this would have to face the consequences of her actions. As soon as I saw the flames engulfing the boat, something inside me snapped into action. It was no longer just about being a mother who feared losing her child. This was a situation that demanded immediate professional response. I had spent years training for situations like this as a fire marshal, and even though I had never encountered anything quite this personal, my instincts took over. In that moment, I knew exactly what had to be done. My daughter, the one person I would give anything to protect, was in that burning boat, and I wasn't about to wait around for someone else to act. I immediately pulled out my radio and called for backup from the local fire department, shouting orders and giving the exact location of the fire. But even as I spoke, I knew I couldn't afford to wait for help. The boat was already burning quickly, and the flames were spreading with alarming speed. I wasn't going to risk losing precious seconds while I waited for the fire crews to arrive. I had to act. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. I ran toward the dock without a second thought, grabbing the fire extinguisher I had kept on hand for emergencies. With each step, I could feel the heat from the flames intensifying. The temperature was unbearable, but I pushed forward, determined not to let the fire consume everything in its path, especially not my daughter. The woman, still standing on the shore, had no idea what she had just unleashed. She watched in confusion as I waded into the water, fully aware of the danger but completely focused on reaching my daughter. I could see the look in her eyes, a mix of surprise and fear, as she realized that I wasn't just some powerless parent. I wasn't going to let her take my daughter from me, not this time. Her smug expression faltered as she saw me moving closer to the boat, the reality of what she had done beginning to settle in. She hadn't expected me to be so prepared, so ready to act. She thought she could control the situation, but she had underestimated me completely. I reached the boat quickly, feeling the heat radiating from the flames even though I was still a few feet away. My daughter was sitting in the boat, frozen with fear, her eyes wide as she tried to understand what was happening. The fire was consuming everything, but she was still alive, still waiting for me to save her. I didn't hesitate. I reached out and pulled her into my arms as carefully and quickly as I could. The flames licked at my clothes, and the smoke burned my lungs, but I didn't care. My daughter was the only thing that mattered in that moment. As I pulled her out of the boat, the woman's expression changed from one of smugness to complete shock. She stood there, unable to move, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I could see the fear in her eyes now, fear not just because of the fire, but because she was now face to face with someone who had the power to stop her. She had put my daughter's life in danger, but she hadn't expected me to be trained for this, to know exactly what to do in this high-pressure moment. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just a mother fighting for her child. I was a trained professional who knew how to save lives. As I carried my daughter to safety, I couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. She was alive, and she was in my arms. But the anger and rage still bubbled beneath the surface. I could feel it in every muscle of my body. This woman, this HOA Karen, had tried to take everything from me in a single act of malice, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I held my daughter close, her tiny arms wrapped tightly around me as I watched the woman stand there, completely stunned, still processing what had just unfolded. She was now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, and the weight of her actions was hitting her hard. But there was no time for me to process my own anger. I had a job to do. I was a fire marshal, and I wasn't about to let this woman walk away without facing consequences. I turned to the woman, who was still rooted to the spot, her face pale and expressionless. "You have no idea what you've just done," I said, my voice cold and firm. I was trying to hold back the fury that was threatening to take over, but the words came out sharp. "You've endangered my daughter's life. You've set her up to die, and for what? To prove a point? To get your way?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself as my daughter clung to me. The woman didn't respond. She didn't have to. The terror in her eyes was answer enough. I could see that the realization of the consequences was sinking in. She had pushed me to the edge, had taken things so far without understanding the depths of what she was doing. Now, as I stood there holding my daughter and watching her face the consequences of her actions, I knew that this moment would define everything. I had saved my daughter, but there was more work to do. The fire department arrived moments later, and together we put out the last of the flames, ensuring that the situation was fully under control. The fire had been extinguished, but the emotional toll of the incident would linger. My daughter was shaken, and so was I, but we were both safe. The woman's twisted actions couldn't change that. She had underestimated not just me, but what it meant to mess with a mother who would do anything to protect her child. In the end, the woman would be held accountable for her actions. What she did was not just an act of cruelty, it was a crime, and there would be consequences for what she had tried to do, but for now I had my daughter back, and nothing, not the fire, not the woman who set it, would ever take that from me. The fire department arrived shortly after, their sirens cutting through the air, signaling the arrival of help. The sight of the fire trucks rushing down the narrow road brought me a sense of relief, though the anger and adrenaline coursing through my veins had not subsided. They immediately began working to fully extinguish the flames, their training kicking in as they doused the fire with precision. The boat, once a bright, cheerful space for my daughter, was now a smoldering hulk, its wood blackened and warped from the fire's intense heat. My daughter, who had been sitting in the boat just moments before, was now safely in my arms. She was shaken, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, but she was unharmed. That was all that mattered. I could feel her trembling in my arms as I held her close, trying to reassure her that everything was okay, though I could hardly believe it myself. The adrenaline from the whole experience still had a hold on me, but my focus was now entirely on the woman who had tried to destroy everything. As I looked up from my daughter, I saw the woman still standing on the dock, her posture stiff and her face pale. She was trembling, perhaps realizing the gravity of what she had just done, but there was no trace of remorse in her expression, just shock and fear, a reflection of her own crumbling confidence. I didn't wait for the fire department to finish their work. I couldn't. This woman had crossed a line, and I needed to confront her immediately. My hands were still shaking from the ordeal, but my voice was steady as I made my way toward her. Every step felt like a battle, but I wasn't going to let this woman get away with what she had done. She had attempted to destroy my life, to take my daughter from me in the most dangerous and malicious way. The thought of what could have happened, the thought of losing my child in such a horrific manner made my blood boil. "You could have killed her," I said, my voice trembling with anger. My words cut through the air, sharp and accusatory. "You have no idea what you've just done. You put her life in danger, and for what? A sick game of control?" The words left my mouth almost involuntarily, but they were words that had to be said. This woman needed to understand just how close she had come to making the worst mistake of her life, how reckless and destructive her actions had been. She didn't say anything in response. She just stood there, staring at me with wide eyes, her lips parted, but no words coming out. It was as though she didn't even know how to respond, and perhaps that was the only response I needed. She was too stunned, too scared to speak, realizing too late the consequences of her actions. The damage was already done. Her attempt to destroy my family had failed, but the emotional scars, those would linger for a long time. I could see the fear in her eyes now. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. The power she thought she had in that moment was gone. Had underestimated me completely, underestimated my love for my daughter, my determination to protect her at all costs. It was clear now that she had never expected me to fight back, to stand up to her the way I had, and in that moment she had realized her mistake. I took a deep breath, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. My daughter was safe, but the emotional toll that this woman had caused would not go unpunished. She had endangered my child's life, and I wouldn't allow her to get away with it. I wasn't about to let her off the hook just because the fire had been put out. What she had done was beyond the pale. "I'm going to make sure you face the consequences for this," I told her, my voice now colder, more resolute. "What you did was criminal, and I won't let it go. You're going to answer for what you've done to my family. There will be legal action. There will be no more threats, no more harm to my family." I meant every word. I wasn't just talking about the fire. This was about everything she had done, everything she had tried to take from me and my daughter. It was about holding her accountable for her actions. The woman stood motionless, still processing the reality of the situation. She had no idea how far I was willing to go to protect my daughter. She had no idea how much strength I had in me when it came to fighting for the ones I loved. And as I stood there, with my daughter safe in my arms, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let anyone like her, anyone who thought they could hurt my family, get away with it. The HOA Karen, standing before me, now understood that she had messed with the wrong person. She had learned the hard way that messing with someone who had the will and the resources to fight back could cost you everything. The fear in her eyes told me all I needed to know. She was starting to understand the consequences of her actions. In the aftermath of the confrontation, I knew there would be a long road ahead. The legal actions would be lengthy, but I was prepared to take them. No matter how much time it took, I would make sure this woman faced the consequences of her reckless behavior. But for now, the most important thing was that my daughter was safe, and I would spend every moment I could repairing the damage done to her sense of safety and trust. No one was going to take that away from us. The fire had been extinguished, but the emotional toll of what had happened would take time to heal. Yet in that moment, I knew that as long as I stood strong, as long as I kept fighting for my daughter, nothing could break us. The damage the woman had tried to inflict on us had been stopped, but I would ensure that she would never have the power to hurt anyone else again. After the fire had been extinguished and my daughter was finally safe in my arms, I knew that the hardest part of this ordeal was not over. I could feel her trembling against me, still processing the trauma of what had just happened. She was scared, confused, and unsure of what had just occurred. I, too, was filled with a mix of emotions. Relief that my daughter was safe, but also a deep sense of anger, betrayal, and sorrow for what she had been forced to experience. It wasn't easy to comfort her, but I made sure that no matter how overwhelming everything felt, she knew she was loved and protected. I stayed with her throughout the night, holding her, reassuring her that the danger was over and that she was home. We didn't sleep much, but I knew the most important thing was that I was there for her. Together, we would heal from this. Next day, as I reflected on what had happened, the gravity of the situation sank in even deeper. The fire, the woman's actions, the sheer malice she had displayed. It was all too much to process in one sitting. But I knew I had to face it head on. My daughter was my priority. The trauma she had endured wasn't something I could fix instantly, but I wasn't going to let this scar her for life. We would go through the healing process together, one step at a time, and I would do everything in my power to ensure that she felt safe again, that she understood that what happened wasn't her fault. It was an injustice, and I wasn't going to let it define her. But the road to healing was going to be long, and I had to be patient, both with her and with myself. I also knew that the HOA Karen could not get away with what she had done. She had taken my daughter from me, put her life in danger, and tried to play God in a situation that had nothing to do with her. What made it worse was that she had used her position in the neighborhood, her self-righteous attitude, to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She had never expected me to react the way I did, never expected that I would fight back with everything I had. She thought she could get away with hurting my family, but she was sorely mistaken. As much as I wanted to put the ordeal behind me, I couldn't simply let her actions go unpunished. My daughter's safety was at stake, and I would make sure that she faced the legal consequences of what she had done. I immediately began to consult with lawyers to understand my options. The legal process was daunting, but I wasn't going to back down. I filed a restraining order against her and began the steps to press charges for kidnapping and endangerment. I wanted to make sure that she would never be able to hurt anyone, again, especially not my daughter. It wasn't just about justice. It was about sending a clear message to people like her, people who thought they could get away with bullying and manipulating others. The legal fight would be long and complicated, but I was prepared for it. I had already shown myself capable of overcoming the worst of circumstances, and I was not about to let this woman escape the consequences of her actions. As I moved forward with the legal process, I also started looking into ways to help my daughter heal. We began therapy together, speaking with a professional who could help her work through the emotional trauma she had suffered. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew that with the right support, my daughter could emerge stronger than ever. I promised her every day that she was safe, and I made sure to create an environment where she felt comfortable, secure, and above all, loved. The experience had shaken her deeply, and I knew it would take time for her to feel truly safe again. But we were in this together. I wouldn't let anything else harm her. What had happened was a wake-up call for me, not just in terms of protecting my daughter, but also about my own strength and resilience. I had always known that I would do anything to protect the people I loved, but I hadn't realized just how far I was willing to go until I was faced with a real threat. I had been forced to stand up for my daughter in a way that I had never imagined, and while the journey was incredibly painful, it had shown me what I was truly capable of. The sense of duty and protection I felt for my family was unshakable. No one would ever take my daughter from me again. No one would threaten my family's safety without facing the consequences, and I was ready to do whatever it took to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen again. The entire experience had been a test of my patience, of my strength, and of my ability to protect my loved ones. But through it all, I had learned one very important thing. I would never let anyone hurt my family, not in any way, shape, or form. And I would make sure that the people who tried would face the full force of the law. The fight wasn't over, but I had already won the most important battle. My daughter was safe, and we would rebuild from here stronger than ever. I was ready for whatever came next, and I would face it with the unwavering resolve that comes from being a mother who would do anything to keep her child safe. If this story shocked you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of survival, strength, and justice. Share this video to spread the word about how far some people will go to hurt others, and make sure to leave a comment. Have you ever faced a similar situation? How did you stand up for your family? Let's talk about it. Stay tuned for more intense and real stories on the HOA Stories.